Well, David, thank you very, very much for doing this, first of all.
It's a delight.
It's a great pleasure for me.
Great fun.
Well, talking about Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy specifically, this is the fifth of your novels featuring George Smiley. Yet the first novel of what we are now calling the Carla trilogy.
Yes.
I wondered at this stage of your writing career, what was the impulse to write Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy?
Well, I was in the intelligence community during the great witch hunt periods, when the Americans were saying to us, you're leaky, you've got traitors in your midst in MI5 and MI6 and so on, and everyone was looking over everybody else's shoulder. And inside the intelligence community, there was a kind of shared paranoia, to my mind. There was a whisper around which created a tension, which went on working through me for a while after I left that world, and which I then tried to express particularly in Tinker Tailor. You have to remember that this was the post-Kim Philby revelation period when Kim Philby, who'd been a very influential member of SIS and was actually probably in line to become its chief, was unmasked as a Soviet mole. Then we'd had George Blake, an extremely distinguished SIS officer who then turned out to have been working for the Russians and actually escaped from Wormwood Scrubs jail. There were leaks coming in from prominent Soviet defectors who were being kept in secret and were bubbling about the idea of a mole. And all of this infected the story, obviously. And I wanted somehow to create that secret world, the people living in a bubble, nobody trusting anybody, the mystery of who said what to whom yesterday, who was in the woodshed at 3 a.m., then the whole issue of what we called character defects, which were the criterion by which people were cleared or not cleared in vetting processes. Is he homosexual? Is he promiscuous? Does he keep a mistress? Is he financially reckless? Are all these things available to a blackmailer? We had a system called positive vetting in those days, where people were supposed to go to the vetters and lay bare any indiscretions they'd committed, because that would then secure them against blackmail. And then finally there was the predominant issue, which we've now completely forgotten, about who believed what at what stage in their lives. Who had been a communist or a fellow traveler or a sympathizer, who had subscribed to Soviet Weekly, the Daily Worker, who had actually approached the Communist Party and obtained secret membership. And a great part of the intelligence effort was to obtain information of that sort, either through the Communist Party itself, which was actually a dead duck. It was a ridiculous thing to spy on. It was over. It was only 25,000 strong. But then the whole wave of sympathy that was still being examined, pro-communist sympathy, which derived from the 30s, the famous years when people were supposedly choosing between communism and Catholicism and communism and capitalism. And all of those challenges, emotional, ideological challenges, were upon us in those days.
And it strikes me that that would create the most extraordinary atmosphere in which to work.
Well, anyway, the atmosphere is secret. You have nobody to trust but your colleagues. You don't tell your wife what you're doing, or very few do. You don't tell your girlfriends, your boyfriends, or whatever you've got. So you're thrown upon one another, and then you don't trust one another. So that really is a secret world within a secret world. Actually, this is not so far from corporate life. This is not so far from the ordinary world. And to imagine that there is a kind of secret, enclosed world where people behave one way, and there's a big overt world where people behave a different way, that's a mistake. And for me, the secret world is simply a metaphor for the larger world in which we live, where we also deceive one another, we deceive ourselves, we make up little stories, we act life rather than live it, and so on. So there was, even within that seemingly estranged community, there was a universality which I believed I could exploit. And it resonated with the public. People understood. They wanted to have their lives translated in terms of conspiracy to quite some extent. And that is still the relationship between man and the institutions that he creates.
This idea of having to be whiter than white, the fact that every aspect of your life would be looked into.
Yes.
How did that limit or perhaps open up the world of the service for those people within it?
Well, it didn't open it up. It threw people upon one another within the service, inevitably. It put you in a strange relationship with the personnel department. But actually, it created a pecking order where promotion was related to clearance, how white, how clean, how secure are you? And then, secondly, to your access to intelligence. And so we have, in this story, we have witchcraft as the gold dust being brought in, this ultra-secret material, too good to check out, you could almost say, in journalistic terms. And that becomes the currency, the money, which advances the group who possess it. And they, of course, are jealous of it. They tend it jealously. They keep it away from others. And they create their own little aristocracy, their own witchcraft-cleared elite. We're talking of corporate behavior, but redefined in intelligence terms. We're talking of the individual relationship to the corporation, but reset in these criteria.
And what makes it so interesting, I think, is that a lot of this intrigue and indeed betrayal happens within the four walls of the circus.
Yes, and you only, in that world, really, you only advance in the eyes of your colleagues. You don't advance in the eyes of the outside world until the vanity of age takes over, and all of a sudden you get people declaring themselves as old spooks and so on. But while they're active, while they're being useful, they are professionally anonymous, and therefore nobody can tell whether they are, as it were, brigadiers or sergeants. Their ranks are not determined from outside, by outside perception. They may live a little better, but that could be private money. So again and again, they're thrown upon one another for prestige, and in a very dangerous way, for love, because actually the whole excitement of life is about who you work with and with whom you share your secrets, and that's a very short step to the bed.
Now, you said that you follow it with fascination, though you were very involved in this adaptation of Tinker Tailor.
I would like to think that I'm involved, but I don't drive from the back seat, and anyway, I wouldn't be allowed to. You know, I wrote the book long ago. It's cold coffee for me as a book. It's delightful. I enjoy it very much in retrospect. I'm proud of it. But what we're dealing with in film is the what if. You know, I mean, really the basic what ifs. What if Smiley was a girl? You know, with film, you have to think the impossible right from the start about how to compress and how to relate the story. So I'm there as a resource, that's all. I mean, I know the material very well, and I offer what mental agility I have to put it in the pool. Other people, real filmmakers, have more agility, but at least it's an add-in, you know. But beyond that, I just keep trying to say, call me when you need me, but I won't call you. This is not the film of the book. This is the film of the film. And they wrote the film. And I think they did it splendidly. Then the director comes aboard, of course, and different criteria and different imperatives exist. And all of a sudden the script, as everything else does, becomes subordinate to an overall vision. And Thomas has that. And you mess with the director's vision with great caution. And so I'm watching an amazing team process unfold. And I don't feel the megalomaniac feeling of you're all creatures of my imagination. The greatest compliment they can pay to the book, as far as I'm concerned, is make their own film from it, to let themselves fly into film world from the book. And I can't navigate that at all.
The circus, where did that come from?
Well, it was just that when I started trying to make a parallel universe to the one that I'd inhabited, I thought Cambridge Circus was an amusing spot. And there was a building opposite Moss Brothers, which had a lot of rather mysterious curved windows to it and 2 or 3 doors. And I thought, well, actually, that would make rather a good Secret Service. In my day in the secret world, which is half a century ago, we lived, SIS inhabited whole suites of dusky little rooms, and Control, i.e. the chief of the Secret Service, lived halfway up a little crooked staircase. Generally speaking, the ethic is the higher you go, the more secret you get. And as you went up to be received by the chief, you saw yourself distorted in a fisheye mirror, which was also available to the eye line of the women I call the mothers who were in charge of his front office. And it stank of war nostalgia. That's the other thing. That people were defined in my day by, oh, he did something absolutely extraordinary in Norway, or so-and-so, he was the darling of the French resistance, and so on and so forth. So people had these secret cachets, and the whole thing about appointing people heroes within the service is that you're actually appointing yourself one. It's a mirror image. You know, he did something absolutely fantastic that I can't tell you about. Means I do fantastic things that I don't tell you about. It's the way vanity expresses itself or externalizes itself. And the mythology of the service is constructed in that way. And collectively they develop a self-perception which is delusional quite often, and that's what leads to asinine performances. I mean, things like The Bay of Pigs resulted from a lot of slightly deluded men sitting in a smoke-filled room with no women present. We didn't even show passes to go in and out of the building in my day. All our faces were known. We did have a flimsy bit of paper if we were challenged, but that meant nothing. It was always, "Good morning, David," or whatever, from the janitors at the door, and they were very watchful guys. And I don't remember ever being stopped. I mean, I'd go out, shop at lunchtime, bring parcels in, shove them beside my desk, take them out again in the evening. And actually, it's a comedy. Part of the comedy of what Kim Philby did was he came into the building on a Friday morning, dressed in a salt and pepper suit, ready to go out to the country, carrying suitcases, as half the people were. They were going off for the weekends with their dinner jackets. And instead of going off for the weekend with his dinner jacket, he piled bunches of paper into the suitcase, took it off for the weekend, spent the weekend photographing the stuff with his Soviet controller, and coming back on the Monday looking as though he'd been away for the weekend. I mean, it was a riot. And so it was a completely, I was charming in that way. The trust that was invested in us, so to speak, was still a remnant of almost of the war. And then it completely busted. And I went into, on some mistaken occasion recently, I went into the new MI5 building, and you go through a whole sheep dip there.
And if we're to look at Smiley, how personal a character would you say Smiley is?
I think it was extremely personal, but not quite for the reasons you might suppose. I think I created in Smiley, in part, the father I never had. I think that I borrowed elements of people I greatly admired and invested them in this mythical character. And I think I also gave Smiley, I'm such a fluent, specious person now, it's different, but I was an extremely awkward fellow in those days. I gave Smiley my social awkwardness, my lack of self-respect, and my fumblings in love. And because I came from an extremely dysfunctional background, I made home the most dangerous place for him. Home is where he lets himself in cautiously. Home is where he sees the shadow of his adulterous wife in the window and wonders who she's with. I had no experience of fatherhood. I had no example of marital bliss or the sort of the family unit, and yet great dreams of England, which I had inherited from the war experience. I was the absolutely archetypal receiver of war propaganda, born 1931, aged therefore 8 when war broke out. I thought the Germans were the worst people in the world, and I thought that Winston Churchill was the greatest man who ever lived. I just bought the whole package when my school was bombed and those things. And it took a long time for me to unlearn the chauvinisms and the simplicities, and that left a disenchanted romantic of Smiley's sort, is a man with a corrosive eye and a natural skepticism, and leftover faiths that he can't place. And so I think it was a very personal creation.
And with your background, were you recruited very happily into the service?
I think with my background, I was looking for parenthood and control and an absolute faith that I could subscribe to. So yes, I mean, anyone could have had me, I think, when I was sort of 16, 17. If they sang the right song and recruited me in the right way, they could have had me, which is why I've always had a sneaking understanding for people who took the wrong route. But that doesn't mean to say I did take it or even contemplate it myself. But I do believe that we fight the wars we inherit, and I believe that we are the human material that is produced. And then it takes a long time to shake ourselves free of those early postures and attitudes. You know, I was brought up to believe all sorts of things that are totally wrong about women, about homosexuals, about black people. All of those things had to be unlearned. So in the reinvention of oneself, you get the therapy of making character.
And that must be an incredibly therapeutic process to write, to reinvent.
It was, it's more than therapeutic. It is the ultimate escape. It's the fictional world is the one where you really want to live. And I think that people who make that their lives, if you take somebody like Balzac on his deathbed, he's asking after the welfare of his characters. We're that mad.
And it must be very gratifying. I mean, to watch Gary as Smiley, an actor that does take his word.
Yes, I identified completely with that. I mean, that was extraordinary. I identified with Alec in one way, but with Gary in a completely different one. And I think that I watch his performance as jealously as he does. And I think I'm aware of the arsenal that he commands. But that's a private experience. You do feel with Oldman a really extraordinary command of himself as an actor, that he steps right outside himself. And I remember that of Alec putting on the glasses. I do think it looks like this. And with Oldman, you share the pain more. I think you share the danger of life more, the danger of being who he is. That is much more acute. And it's a much tougher Smiley, with here and there, as it is in most of us, a little cruelty, which comes with solitude, which he also radiates.
And still a Smiley that you recognise.
And still a Smiley I recognise, very much so, yes.
Now I have to ask you, what I remember is about your visit to the set, which I know was an enormous boon to everyone on the production. Can you tell us about when you're visiting the set and seeing that party scene that you visited?
Yes. Well, it was one of the scenes that we had talked about, a scene in which I feel I had some input, that the parties in those services in my day were riotous. The Christmas parties went absolutely wild. People said the most extraordinary things to one another. On the whole, significant others did not come in. So come, whatever it was, the 22nd or 23rd of December, there was a huge knees up. And people were waiting for it. And enormous amounts of drink were brought into the building. And I remember one year that the police, we were in Curzon Street then, the police hammered on the door and we went down, let them in. They said, you're making too much noise and somebody's throwing bottles out of the window. It's not what you associate with sedate, discreet Secret Service. So that was very funny. And then we discussed what kind of party would be right. And somebody had the brilliant idea, I don't think it was I, of having a kind of Santa Lenin. And sending up the whole communist connection. And then, as the follow-on from that, it was decided by the makers, the filmmakers, that the Russian national anthem would be sung. And then a rather delicate, quiet lady appeared on the stage as we all sat there and tried to teach us in as many words the Russian national anthem. First of all, I have no Russian. Secondly, I have no music. I'm completely tone deaf. So I had to imagine also who I was at my great age, sitting in that community. And I decided that I was the kind of elderly gay librarian who'd been brought in for love of old times and was being sort of licensed to get plastered. And I was content with that identity for a while. I enjoyed it very much. I'm afraid I can't claim that I really star in the movie, but I think I may be glimpsed.
Were you happy with your performance?
I thought it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I couldn't get over how good I was.
I think that's the key change you've made recently, is a bit more of David's performance in there. That's all it needs.
Oh yes, that's right. Yes, less of Gary and more of me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
With the cast all over you, as far as I imagine that halfway through the process, there was still a few question marks in there.
There was a delightful little cameo when I was just sat at a table with 2 or 3 other people, actors, who were contracted to come in. They came from the casting team. And they didn't recognize me. And I think they thought I was a blackleg. And they gave me the hairy eyeball. And, and then Thomas got up and introduced me and made me stand up and identify myself. And they became suddenly extraordinarily friendly. I haven't been through this a lot. There've been, I don't know, 5 or 6 movies of my books, but I did visit Tinker Tailor when it was being made as a television series, I think twice, and I watched Alec in one scene. He just asked if I could be removed. He found it disconcerting, so I left. And with The Constant Gardener, I was never on the set. I make my living and my reputation out of writing books. That's where my heart is. But vast majority of the public doesn't read. If they have access to the story through another medium, I'm delighted. If it inspires them to go and get the book, I'm doubly delighted. And it's a huge thrill to get together among very creative people who work in a different medium and see them at work and watch it from the outside. I mean, it's a great buzz. It's wonderful. There are several of my books that have been bought and then unfortunately had a lot of money spent on them and they haven't been made, which makes them now impossible to make. So, but it doesn't keep me awake. I mean, what really keeps me awake is the next novel.
I wanted to ask about Smiley and whether you've come to realise why he has endured.
I think Smiley has components which have mass appeal, if you like. That's to say, he's out of sync with his employer constantly. He has a romantic agenda that he can never fulfill. He's bad at some things, like bad at love, probably. He's made a fool of by his wife. He sees a lot and can do nothing about it. And seeing a lot is very painful. And he bears that pain. So he's a kind of secular Father Brown. He's a very good listener. He's a good listening ear, a good guy to confess to. And he has the wonderful resource of memory. He can retrieve for you. He keeps for you. In that sense, he's like a kind of lovely old dog. And so I think people find him a good companion. I mean, that's the best thing you can do in writing, is to give the reader a hand to hold when he goes through a story. And Smiley's was a good hand to hold. And once he was there, and once you had his memory to rely on, the whole memory bank that he represents, you knew you were going to have an outcome. You knew it was going to be okay. And the reason I gave up writing about him was it was too bloody comfortable for the reader. It was going to come out all right. Smiley would be there still. And his whole perception of sex, life, love, is all the eye line of a 60-something-year-old gentleman. And I just thought I would do away with that. I'd been there, done it, and that's fine. But the older you get, the younger you want to write.
And is Smiley the kind of spy that you would have liked to have been?
Yeah, we need spies. I mean, we do need, there's absolutely no question, but the art of collecting information, whether it's academic or whether it's espionage, has to be pursued. Basically, we've got to have them, but I think we should never over-respect them. We should never imagine that they're the solution. They're part of the problem. And the most dangerous thing is that every new government that takes over the secret services is thrilled by them. The tired prime minister at the end of his day can open the other door and let in somebody who says, well, what do you want me to do? He's bored to death all the time by irritating committee work, cabinet work, all these trivial things he has to deal with. But suddenly the spooks look like a panacea. The really important thing is that you not be enchanted by them. Use them, and don't let them use you. But if you employ people to be larcenous, which we do, you've got to be bloody careful. So who will spy on the spies?
Would you say that your representation of the Secret Service is absolutely authentic, and knowing your background in the service, I don't question that any of these things actually happened?
No, it's nonsense. I mean, it is nonsense. It's anybody who really has, I mean, the best compliment that can be paid to me by my colleagues at that time is that it had absolutely nothing to do with the life we lived, that this was a con. And the whole art of writing is not to be authentic, it's to be plausible, credible. You come into my world and you believe what I tell you. That's the art of it. You're sitting across the fire from me. I'm trying to persuade you this is the world you enter. It's not a documentary.
So at no point are you feeling that you were sailing quite close to the wind with...
I think that I sailed very close to it in terms of the mentality, in terms of what the French would call the déformation professionnelle that overtakes you. That once you've lived the inside-out world of espionage, you never shed it, you never lose it. It's a mentality. It's a double standard of existence that probably you have it before you enter, which is what makes you attractive. You have a bit of larceny, you have a double way of looking at people, and you instinctively manipulate and so on. I mean, I think what makes the stuff readable is actually, although you think you may be reading a documentary novel or a documentary story, your feelings are being awoken in places you don't expect. There are love stories, there are disenchantments, there is a pervading atmosphere of disappointment that somehow we should be working for a better world, somehow we should be creating a better world, and above all, we've lost a world. Smiley was a kind of archaeologist going back into Britain's past when he goes to see Connie Sachs in Oxford and so on. I think, too, in the film, people are connected, particularly the men are connected with one another, by a collective sense of loss, that they entered perhaps, as I entered the secret world, with a feeling that I could really make a difference, that I would be brave, I would empty the drains for people. I would enable people, crummy people, to sleep in their beds at night. I would sacrifice myself for the greater good. But the discovery, really, that you are just turning over a system that gets neither better nor worse, but it's a continuum, is extremely depressing. A policeman makes arrests. A policeman looks for his killer, finds him, interrogates him, sends him to court, and he goes to prison. A spy, if he detects another spy, he doesn't do that. He wants to obtain him. He wants to use him, convert him. He wants to take over his network. He wants the continuum still under his control. If you go and wrap up a great big network that is spying on you, the one thing you may be sure of is be another one soon. But if you can obtain it and make it work for you, whether it knows it or not, then the continuum is intact. And that has, I think, in the long term, a deeply depressing effect on the general atmosphere of a building. It did for me.
In your 80th year, and with such a prolific career behind you, still writing as prolifically, what motivates you?
The love of it. I mean, why do you ride a horse? Why do you listen to music? It's who you are. It's who I am, anyway. I suppose from childhood onwards, the fictional world has always been more attractive than the real one. And I was driven into myself as a child very much, and I learned to mistrust humanity. And women were people who went away. And out of that was born a storyteller. Frankie Howard was asked why he made people laugh, why he needed to. He said, because all my life I've been terrified of ridicule. And maybe novelists ultimately are people who are frightened of the truth.
And that still motivates you today?
Still makes Sammy run.